Or what do you think you were ultimately running from?
Myself and everything that was going on inside me. And it was such a violent storm, really, of such conflicting emotions. I had this really intense fear, fear that it would happen to me, or that I would become like my father. And I think that fear really dictated my behavior and came with me everywhere for so long. And I had this sense of betrayal that my brother had said that he would always be here for me, and he wasn't. And I think that really, affected my sense of trust in other people and trust in the world. And I had a huge sense of rejection, and that very much stayed with me. And I couldn't understand why I seemed to be so hypersensitive to rejection. And I remember a friend saying to me many years later that she had felt that Adam's death was the ultimate rejection of her love. And at that point, I just went, yeah, that's exactly what it felt like. It felt like my love wasn't enough, and it wasn't enough to keep him alive. And I had this huge sense of anger as well. And I think, the anger perhaps was one of the hardest things for me to really come to terms with. And I really suppressed it and repressed it. And that was hurting me, and I didn't realize that. And I used to kind of siphon off this anger to other people, and just really push it down. And it was so difficult to process that and allow myself to be angry and to even feel what anger was, and especially towards Adam. And I think I very much also had this horrible sense of shame. Shame that I was a bad person. I was a bad person because I hadn't been able to save my brother, or my mother. And that came with me, and that sense of I was only, my self-worth, really. So I think I was running from all of those really intense emotions, as well as obviously, intense grief.
Was there a point in time where you just thought, I've got to stop running, I have to face this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when I was about 32, and there was a whole load of things that all seemed to happen at the same time. So I went to a call as a firefighter that was a suicide. And I had a really physical, visceral reaction to that, and where I felt I was going to vomit. And at the same time, I had a colleague who attempted suicide and wrote this letter that just reached straight into my heart and just pull it apart, really. And I also had the breakdown of a very short but quite intense relationship. And when that relationship ended, it was like it tapped into this huge sense of grief and loss, which didn't make sense for how long that relationship had been. And at some point, I remember very clearly waking up in the middle of the night going, it's the same pain. It's the same old pain. And it was like this realization that I was grieving for my brother through the loss of that relationship. So I think all of those things all sort of came together. And my sister, bless her, turned to me and said, Tara, you've got to sort it out. I think that was when I went, I need to get some help and I need to change something.
Tara, one of the things that I just found so amazing about your book was how you were able to face those challenges, one of the things that you wrote about was having to do the work in confronting those challenges. And can you just talk about a little bit about the things that you did that helped you confront those challenges, and what you mean by having to do the work?
Yeah, I think there was many things that I did, but certainly the most important ones were seeking help from a therapist and finding the right person. And over 17 years, I've had 3 different therapists, and they've all been fantastic, but at different times for different reasons, and just slowly peeling back those layers that I'd really created around myself to try and keep myself safe. But also certainly writing my life story down. I didn't start writing with that intention, but it just kind of happened. And I think a lot of the book was written not with the intention of anybody ever reading it. But when you write, and writing my life story down really gave me a sense of self-compassion that I couldn't have had, and self-understanding if I hadn't have actually done that, of kind of looking at all the things that had happened in my life and going, no wonder, you find it difficult to hold healthy relationships. No wonder you don't believe in yourself and have any self-confidence, all those sorts of things. It made sense. And I think, writing writing at the same time as seeing a therapist was really transformative for me. But I certainly did all those many other things in terms of investing in the quality and of my relationships with all sorts of people, with friends around me, finding my passions and finding that how that connected me to life, really. And that was a source of joy, which I hadn't really been able to experience joy before that, I think. So that was important. Finding a sense of belonging in being in Australia and joining the fire brigade and being involved in surf lifesaving and community and all those sort of things that made me feel like I belonged. And being grateful, having a little book by my bed that I'd write 3 things to be grateful for every night. And obviously the basics like exercise and healthy diet and meditation and yoga and all those sorts of things. But I think, it really is about work. And I think we're not really taught that to be happy might need work. And I think, it's really that sustained effort of certainly prioritizing my own mental health, but also my spiritual health and my physical health and my emotional health, and committing to that and prioritizing that. And I still do, and it's an ever evolving thing. And I think that I wanted some epiphany that I would suddenly wake up and be fixed, and it would, and my sign was going to be that I would get married and have children, and that was going to be the thing that proved to me that I was kind of fixed and better. And I realized that that's very much not the case. And I think, we're sort of taught in our society to have that kind of, that things come easy and that we don't necessarily have to commit or make effort to actually be happy. And I think that's not helpful for us. And I really realize that work is something that I will always be invested in and that I will continue to do for the rest of my life.
Yeah. I've got a question here, Tara, which it's about post-traumatic growth. And I think this is actually a good segue into this topic of post-traumatic growth. We can come back to my questions in a moment, but what is post-traumatic growth, and how does one acquire post-traumatic growth?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, because it's a phrase that's really come up a lot more, I think, in the last few years, and previously wasn't really used, certainly around suicide. It was used much more for sort of defense personnel and war and those sorts of things, but not so much around suicide. So trauma is really when something shatters your assumptions about the world, that the world is safe and good and that good things will happen. And trauma shatters all of that. And the growth that can occur after trauma is about how you accommodate those events into your life, and how it shapes. There are sort of 5 domains of post-traumatic growth. So how it can help you to appreciate the simplicity in life. It can help to build deeper relationships. It can help to give you more meaning and purpose and develop, I guess, your spiritual side. So that's what, it can look different in different people. But I think what's important is that the growth comes because of the struggle, and that you can have post-traumatic stress disorder, which can coexist with growth. So I think that's a really important thing to mention, that, you can't, I think we all want to skip the bad bit and go straight to the growth bit kind of thing. And that, hey, we can all just grow. But also that, what we know is that there's no kind of fixed way to go, right, I'm going to experience post-traumatic growth. But there are certainly things that we can do that might facilitate that and help us. And part of that is certainly getting support and looking after, all the things really that I mentioned, and kind of, I wasn't trying to experience post-traumatic growth, but all of those things we now know can certainly facilitate that process. But often it doesn't really occur till between the primary time after an event that occurs is between 2 and 5 years.
Got another question here. Are you trying to reach a finishing point in your journey, Tara, or do you accept that you're going to have mental challenges and that there's going to be the post-traumatic growth? They'll always be there. Yeah, no, I think very much there's no fixed point. I don't look to an end point at all. And really, I think, that whole saying about the journey, not the destination, it's so true, because if you look at what is the ultimate destination, the ultimate destination really is death, or depending on how you view death. And
So I think it is very much about continuing on that. It's a continual process, and it's a continual process of growth. And, what I find now is that I'm just so much better at meeting the challenges that face me. Better in a way that, I will still get upset if something happens, and obviously depending on what it is and how terrible it is, if you like. But but I will recover so much more quickly and be able to move forward in a way that is constructive, not destructive. Certainly for me, and that is without doubt the difference. And in a way, the greatest skill that I've learned through my experiences is how can I struggle in a way that is growthful, not destructive.
Just going back to your memoir, you wrote some very heartfelt letters in your memoir to members of your family. Can you just talk a little bit about those letters that you wrote and why you wrote them?
Yeah, I think they were such an important part of my process, really. And they really allowed me to re-script and redefine the relationships with some of my family members. And even with people that had died. And I think that's such an important thing. So I wrote to my father and to my brother and to my mother. And I wrote really many times over several years. And it allowed me to have that continuing dialogue and continuing bond, which I think is so important, especially with people who have died, and to kind of, as I said, redefine those relationships. So I didn't send all of them. I only sent one to my father. But when I wrote that letter, I worked with a psychologist to be able to construct that in a way that was respectful for me and for my father, and allowed me to be not reactive. Letter writing really allowed me to be not react from that emotional space about things that were so emotional, and didn't, was most likely to be received in a way that wasn't aggressive. And so I think, that really allowed me to make peace with the relationship with my father and accept him for the person that he was and the father that he was able to be for me, and rather than just seeing what he wasn't able to be for me. And I think, the letters to my mother and my brother did the same. They really, helped for me to make peace with those relationships.
Yeah, they were very moving letters, Tara. They certainly were. I'm going to ask you to read a passage from your book. I think people who are listening will find this a very poignant passage. This is actually the continuation of a passage that you read when we did a podcast a few months ago. So over to you, Tara.
Thanks, Dean. I stand still, looking at my brother, my other half, my mirrored soul, my heart, yet also my burden, my chains, my cloak. I look up ahead of me uncertainly, oscillating between the past and the future, the solitude and uncertainty of the way up versus the familiarity and comfort of the path behind me. Adam nods at me reassuringly. He lifts his hand to take my cloak. I remain still, torn. The wind stops. My brother nods once more in an unspoken gift of freedom. I begin to walk tentatively, checking to look back all the while, still seeing my brother looking at me, nodding, smiling his beautiful, radiant smile. I keep walking, my feet feeling firmer on the ground, looking back less often until I turn and Adam is just a spot on the horizon. I cannot let him go completely. I need to be able to see him, to be able to check he is okay. Just the line of sight, that's all, enough to keep the cord alive.
Thanks, Tara. I can appreciate that's difficult to read for you. Can you just talk a little bit about what's happening in that passage?
I think it was just me acknowledging the struggle to let go, and to let myself be me. And how frightening that was for me, and how vulnerable I felt in trying to do that. And that I thought that that meant I was losing him all over again. And really it just meant letting go of the story that I had told myself for so many years, that I had to be the person that I thought that he wanted me to be, and to live only for him. And that was really strangling me. And it was about accepting that I could love him, still live for me, and be the person that I wanted to be, that was so desperately trying to get out.